So every year, managers and employees have to go through this terrible ordeal that costs time, money, and effort, which delivers very little value. Actually, it's worse than that. It can decrease employees' motivation and can actually occasionally make them leave the company. So you know what I'm talking about. It's performance appraisal time. It's amazing that so many of us are unwilling to let go of a system that costs so much and yet it doesn't improve performance. But fortunately, the tide is turning and many HR teams are introducing different approaches that do actually work. So today we're going to look at why those traditional approaches don't work, why we cling on to the old ways when they're obviously not delivering, and what the alternatives are. And with me today is a man who knows more about this topic than most, Doug Dennerline, who is the CEO of Betterworks, leading performance management software and author of the book Make Work Better. So for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm now showing you the book. And so a really big welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Lucy. Appreciate you having me.
So where am I talking to you today?
I live in Northern California. I've been a Bay Area person for 40 years now, so seen lots of transitions in technology as a tech guy.
I can imagine. So let's talk a bit about your background, because obviously you head up Betterworks now, and we'll talk a bit about that. But your background is very much the kind of Silicon Valley brand, blue chip brand. So tell us a bit about your background and how you came to head up
Yeah,
Betterworks.
yeah. Well, so I have a funny career. I spent probably 25 years of my 45-year career being in the sales organization and the networking organizations of 3Com Corporation and Cisco Systems. And at Cisco, I had a team of 6,000 people. I had an HR
Wow.
business partner. We did all those lovely, horrible traditional HR processes around annual reviews. 6 months later, we did comp reviews. We did a bell curve ratings with a bell curve, top 15, bottom five, calibration, 9 block, all those things. And I used to see how horribly the effect of it was on leaders and people. And then ultimately, my last role at Cisco, I had a lot to do with why we acquired WebEx as a technology, and I became the CEO of WebEx for 3 years. And so, running a business over this kind of technology, I thought we could have done that 10 years ago, but it took Eric Yuan and a pandemic to teach people that we can do it this way.
Yeah.
But I ended up, after running WebEx, I've been basically CEO of SaaS companies. And the one I went to after Cisco was SuccessFactors. And so they were at the time the first kind of big company in the HCM space to be
Yeah.
in the performance management space, to put it into the cloud. And since then, and when I ran a couple other companies, but I ended up here for a passion. What we've been focused on here. When I got here, this was largely Betterworks was an OKR company, objective and key results.
Mm-hmm.
And by themselves, it's a bit of a tax. And so I brought all the HR stuff with me here that I feel can really change the process from being something that doesn't work to something that actually meets the needs of today's workforce. And so we've
Well,
been
no
focused
doubt
on that.
we'll talk a little bit about Betterworks and the product and how it helps leaders and employees do this performance thing in different ways as we go through. But I kind of want to take you back to those days of Cisco and to get a leadership perspective really on, we know it feels horrible when we're going through that rating and the end of year review, but why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it drive performance? Because as an HR director, that's what I told my leaders every
Yeah.
year. You've got to do it because it's going to help you improve performance and motivation. It never did, but why? Why is that?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, and a lot of why I wrote the book is it's backwards looking. It's largely, as we all say in HR, it's recency biased.
Yeah.
It's what's the last thing I did with this person, and that's when I'm going to tell them about their body of work, which really isn't about their body of work.
Yeah.
It forces you to have a conversation because you didn't make the top 15%, who get all the attention and all the money that's going to happen that year. And, to me, it's like telling 75% of the company, you're just mediocre.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel good to anybody. So, you know, so it's pretty obvious why it doesn't work. Especially the workforce age today, they don't want to be talked to once a year about how they did. They want to be talked to on the regular about how they're doing and what they need to do to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole grading thing is so fascinating. I can remember as a leader myself having conversations with my team, and I'd be this would be a really good member of my team, and I'd be saying, you've had this great year and you've done this, and I'm really happy about that, and you're a 2, and they'd say, but I was a 1 last year, and then you'd get into this kind of trying to justify why when they're
Exactly.
not quite as good as they were before, even though they were having a great year. And you just thought there's got to be a better way. So the whole
Yeah.
performance thing, I think you're right as well about the recency bias. I could only ever remember what that person had done in the last 6 weeks. There's no way I could kind of sum up their entire year. Um, and, we know as human beings, we can only really change one behavior at a time. And yet we've got leaders kind of saving up all this stuff and giving all this feedback in one go, usually quite clumsily because they're not rehearsed at doing it. They're not experienced at doing it. So for all sorts of reasons, we know this doesn't actually improve performance. We know performance comes through small course corrections throughout the year. We know it doesn't motivate, as you've said, unless you're getting that top rating. 80%, 75% are being told they're mediocre. So it doesn't motivate. So why do we cling on to it? Why is it that, I'm still talking to HR professionals who say, oh, well, our leaders want a rating system, or we feel it's important to have this once a year process. Why do we cling on to it?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that we do. I think a couple reasons. For one, a lot of other HR processes are tied to kind of that one rating, and again, all the things that happen behind that. So how do you disconnect that if you go to something that what we would say today is 4 lightweight conversations, 1 per quarter, versus 1 a year? I think the other one for me, Lucy, is not many HR people, and I don't mean this to be as derogatory as it sounds, but it's risky when they go, wow, I'm going to change this thing I've been doing forever and bring this whole new process in, and people might not like it, and I'm going to risk my job, you know?
Well, I was fascinated in your book, and I'm going to do another plug, Make Work Better, is that you talk about its origins being after is it the Second World War or the First World War?
It was the U.S. Army 100 years ago. I mean, it's really been around for 100 years.
Yeah,
It
so the
was made popular by
1920s.
it was made popular by Jack Welch in the 70s, and we've all been stuck with it ever since.
I
The other
agree
thing,
with you. I think HR professionals, they are asking different things of leaders, aren't they? They're asking leaders to move away from the safety blanket of a form, security blanket, the safety net of a form. A process that they may hate, but they understand, and instead move to a more open-ended career conversation. I also agree with you that what I see a lot of HR people saying, but how will we pay bonuses? How will we pay increases if we haven't got that number to connect it to? How will we do that? And of course, you and I know that there are definitely ways to do it,
yeah,
which are absolutely fine. But it makes people anxious about releasing this kind of the security of having a form, a process, and a number that comes out the other end, as if this number has validity and science behind it when we know it doesn't.
that's right.
Um, so let's refocus and talk about what does a better approach look like. And some of it's in the language. I think you talk about, I think,
Hmm.
performance enablement and
Right.
performance empowerment, and as opposed to performance management. And I couldn't agree more that actually the idea that I'm going to have someone manage my performance is just not feasible. Actually,
Yeah.
it's so determined by me as an individual, isn't it? But
Yeah.
tell us about, from your perspective, the the kind of the elements that make up a different approach, that one that works?
Yeah, so I'll walk you through it. And we've seen this with many of our customers, and we see the impact it has on people. Um, so the first thing we do in our product is we want you as a collective company, and this is really important at the highest level, is to set your goals each quarter that you want to make sure that everybody in the organization understands what the company's trying to accomplish. And most companies do this once a year. It's a big effort. Lots of work goes into it. They talk about it. They do a big presentation, and then it goes in a drawer at the end of the year. Look back, they go, "Did we do it?" Well, we like it to think that you want to, especially in today's speedy markets, and look what's going on today, you might have to alter your goals all along the way to meet market conditions. So the first thing is setting goals so that everyone in the organization can now look up. A manager can sit with their individual contributors. They can say, okay, this is what the company's trying to accomplish. What are you and I going to do to help the company achieve its goals? And then more importantly, I want to help you become who you want to be as a person in this company. And so let's work on how do we develop you into that person. And let's
So
set
let's
some goals.
just unpick that a little bit. So this
Yeah.
kind of regular refreshing of goals, and I think quite often, and this is going to be a theme in this podcast, that you move from big annual set piece to something that's much more fluid and done regularly and agile. And I think sometimes, again, when HR is talking to managers about a new approach that is more frequent, more agile, more fluid, they think that it's the same set piece that they were doing annually, but now they've got to do it quarterly or monthly. And that's not what we're talking about here, is
It's
it?
not. It's not. I mean, it's all about lightweight, and it's all about time it takes to do the process. So what the other thing we've done with we have a goal application, and then we have what we call conversation capability, where what you're doing is you're getting into our application and you're asking two or three questions that are developed by on my team working with your team in HR, so it represents your culture, about a couple of questions. What were your goals? Were you able to achieve them? Did you hit any roadblocks? How can I help you as a manager? And then we use AI to help you actually write it and to make sure that it removes bias. If there's bias in the way that you're communicating with somebody, it makes it actionable, professional. And then it also shows the manager if we did recommend changing the wording, why we changed it.
Yeah.
And educating them along the way. And then most people have a mid-quarter check-in. So basically, Lucy, it's creating a conversation between manager and employee on an ongoing basis. So our average user is in our product once a week. So they're either updating a goal, there's a manager commenting on, hey, nice progress against that goal, good work. It's creating an ongoing conversation. And then there's the capability to do feedback. We have a one-on-one capability so that you can touch base every week on kind of what are the tactical things you're going to work on this week to make sure we're making progress. And the other thing that's great for managers is you can see that what's most important for you to get done that quarter, that progress is being made there. And if it's not, you can jump in and help somebody work through that.
In the book, and I know you and I have spoken about this as well, and it's something that I believe very firmly, is that the more that we can make employees responsible for the design, creation, recording of their own goals, the more inclined they'll be to push forward to try and achieve them, rather than having them kind of cascaded down through the organization.
Right.
And you talked earlier about the fact that we've got perhaps too many goals, or they're too set in stone and they're not reviewed regularly enough. But there's also this awful cascade that goes on, isn't there?
Right.
So just talk to me a little bit about your perspective on how employees could set their own goals.
That's right. And that's a really important point you're making, Lucy. Thanks for bringing it up. A lot of companies, when they do that annual thing, then they just shove those goals down deeply in the organization. And when you're 3 layers or 4 layers down, they mean literally nothing to you.
Yeah.
Right. And so what's important is that you have conversations at every level with the people that manager of managers, manager of contributors, is based upon those goals. What are your personal goals? What are we going to do together to make sure that we're moving not only you forward, but the company forward? And, there's a statistic at Gallup says 78% of people in a company greater than 1,000 people don't really understand how their work helps their company achieve its goals. And so you'll see a really big increase in engagement scores when you use a product like ours, because now you go, hey, look, I know my work is moving the things forward, and I understand what the company's trying to accomplish too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we talk a lot about well-being and engagement, and yet that fact around knowing that I'm doing meaningful work that is contributing is right up there. We can kind of drop a lot of the Zoom yoga and the Fitbits and the free, granola bars, and actually refocus our attention much more on this. How do we ensure that people know what they're doing contributes, and have some autonomy and some control over the design of that, rather than it being cascaded. We used to bang on, didn't we, about having line of sight, and then you'd find this something
Funny.
ridiculous, like, some poor receptionist who's got a line of sight through to the board goals, and it was just making no sense to him or her. So kind of features for you are around this kind of frequency of goal setting, light touch, this sense of kind of looking forward, employees owning and creating their own goals and having regular conversations around that. And the line manager being much more adept at having better conversations. Now, of course, that last piece, line managers being better at having conversations and asking questions, is probably been on HR's agenda for, since their HR teams existed.
Yeah.
Why do you think managers find it hard? Is it lack of skill? Is it lack of interest? Is it lack of experience? What is it that
Yeah.
line managers find hard?
Maybe a little bit of all those things, Lucy, but when you only do this or are required to do this once a year, you certainly aren't an expert at it. When you do it all the time, it's forcing a relationship that I don't think manager and individual contributor normally have. I mean, they're speaking on a regular basis. I think the other thing is the individual says, hey, my manager actually understands the work that I'm doing. They're agreeing with me on what I'm going to accomplish this quarter. And so they care about me. They're helping me develop. And so that it creates a sense of trust that you don't get when you look back once a year and say, how'd you do? And it's kind of, usually it's more about the negative than the positive. And most managers aren't brave enough to give difficult feedback to someone. I do think that and my company, I'll admit it, I'm kind of an AI person. I've been really focused on AI in my product and in my company. It can really help with the language that you give feedback to someone. I went into ChatGPT and I said, I have an employee I have to give some difficult feedback to. Can you help me understand how to do that? And it spit out in 30 seconds a 10-point plan on how to have a difficult conversation with somebody.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah. And I think, we've seen in HR AI being used to take over some of the transactional piece, but actually helping with human relationships is not something we've necessarily known it for. But I would absolutely agree with you there. I think that reframing, rephrasing, thinking through the implications of the way that you phrase things, AI can absolutely help with that as long as you've got the right prompts. Let's talk a bit more about tech and the role that it can play in help making the change. I mean, you mentioned that you worked for SuccessFactors and you were very senior in SuccessFactors, and I've kind of always had some slight problems with the big enterprise systems and the big HR systems, because I felt that they hardwired in many of the traditional processes that weren't working. So I would say to HR directors, whatever you do, don't buy the performance and talent package. Don't do it. No, I am sure it's a long time since I've familiarized myself with the big players, but so I'm sure they're all doing amazing things. What role can technology, not just your product, but what role can technology play, not in just automating old processes, but genuinely helping to change behavior, particularly from line managers?
Yeah, it's really important that you don't. Tech is important. I'll talk about answering your question in a second, but it's got to be. You got to change management through that process, irrespective of technology. And I think then tech becomes the enabler of it and helps you design how you want it to be implemented and keeps people on track. Otherwise, it's, you're depending on HR reaching out saying, hey, you need to do this, chasing people down, being the police.
Yeah.
With us, there's notification engines and it says, hey, it's time for this. You should take some time to do that. You should reach out to your person and they haven't updated a goal in a while. So reach out and find out, if they're having a difficulty. So it's an assistant to the change management process, but what you have to first design is the change management process.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that?
Um, yeah, I mean, going again, we've talked about it. To teach people that they want to be going through a regular interaction with folks, not once a year, giving constant feedback. As an example, Lucy, in our product, when you go in to give somebody a feedback on the quarterly conversation, we display for you all their goals, how they did against their goals, the feedback they've received, the recognition they've gotten in the company, how they progressed on their one-on-ones. It shows you their body of work as you're now giving them feedback. You don't have to use your memory. You can just say, wow, okay, they did this on their goals. They did a nice job here. They got some great feedback, and it helps form what feedback you want to give to somebody. And so we always keep all that data. It informs, so we have a calibration product and a 9-box product. And it can help inform you where people belong in that at the end of the year, because candidly, Lucy, many people, even in our product, still want an end of year thing. And so what we do is we create an outline of their body of work for the year and says, here's what you told them they did, their strengths and their weaknesses were. So we just display it for you and kind of help you write literally the review for you based upon the body of work and the feedback they've gotten.
It's interesting, isn't it? That I think even with the better conversations that are being facilitated, there is still a tendency to want to cling to that. Give
Yeah,
me a mark, give me a grade. That kind of very almost end of school report
that's right.
approach. I think for me the technology is, if it's about forming new habits, if it's supporting that, if it's about helping build new skills, I think it can be incredibly supportive in that. You mentioned the kind of AI coach for managers. I think that's really exciting
Yeah,
and an element that wasn't available, even a year ago, really, 2
that's
years
right.
ago, certainly. And so that is just coming on leaps and bounds. And I think this kind of interactive learning the manager's style, learning their language, learning what matters to them, and then giving them some prompts for how they might frame the feedback in slightly different ways, I think is a really, really helpful piece. I think when we turn to technology and think this is the answer without really thinking through the education piece, the engagement piece,
Yeah,
the involving people and truly understanding why the traditional approaches haven't worked and what does work, I think then that can be more problematic. But there's some amazing products, including yours, out there. Can we talk a little bit about, before we wrap things up, about HR's role in making change happen? What if you're advising HR
yeah.
teams around wanting to make the change away from a very traditional approach, what are the kind of the things that you've seen been most successful?
Yeah, that's what the book is really all about, Lucy. When I was at Cisco and I had 6,000 people, I also had a very good relationship with the CHRO of Cisco for the 12 years I was there. And so whenever they hired a new HR business partner, they gave them to me. Me and my 6,000 folks, we would work together and figure that out. And then they go off to some other function. And I saw great ones and I saw not so great ones. And what was a great one to me was somebody that isn't, wasn't my coach, but I call them mobilizers. They have an opinion. They understand the business. They understand what the business is trying to accomplish. They're a mirror for you as a CEO saying, if this is where we want to get in 5 years, these two members of your team don't have the skills to get you there, and you need to do something about it. Yes, you're friends, but you know what? It's time to make a change. And I always appreciated that level of support
Yeah.
and holding that mirror into my face. And so, I encourage HR people to not be tactical, not be the person that, only works on making sure people don't get sued and they do the processes, but to have a good CHRO next to a good CEO that understands people are the most important asset in today's world, that and the impact that can have when you have that strong relationship can change the culture of a company pretty dramatically. And so I love finding HR men and women who are those mobilizers. They're like, I'm going to help my company succeed, and I'm going to do the things I need to do, and I'm going to hold everybody responsible, and they're not going to get away with, just trying to make me not have a seat at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was recording something, I can't remember what it was for now, but it was talking about, when is it an HR's job and when is it the manager's job? And I think for me, it comes down to, and when it's HR's job to create the conditions where people can perform and grow. And it's the manager's job to make sure they do perform and grow. It's not about HR having the conversations for the manager on their behalf, doing the stuff that they want to avoid.
Yeah.
It's not about providing tons of process that doesn't work. It's about really finding those things that's going to unlock that manager's ability to make sure they do perform. And that takes great insight. It takes, I'm not saying we all have to be psychologists, but I think it helps if they understand the way that, different people tick and what's going to work in this situation. I think when we look at rolling out a change program, whether it be performance management or anything else, just having one business case, which you then kind of assume that everybody's going to move at the same pace, isn't like that, is it?
No, it's not.
I think that kind of ability to know who are your early adopters and when to push hard here and when to back off a little bit because they're just not ready. I think that for me, those are the really great business partners that I've worked with.
I think the other really important relationship, Lucy, is the leadership of the company. You need a CEO that gets it too, because they can, I've seen a lot of HR people that would love to do things a little differently, and they just don't have support from above. And so for me, one of the chapters in the book is, what to look for in a CEO and what does a CEO need to look for in a CHRO? Don't work for somebody that's just going to be, no, we don't want to do that. No, we don't want to do that. No, we don't want to do that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. If I'm ever talking to an HR director or a business partner who's getting stuff done, who's enjoying their work, who's feeling like they've got credibility and influence, that's, experimenting and innovating, and you ask them, tell me about your role, tell me about where you were, and they will always talk about the fact that they have a great relationship with the leader. Right. If they don't, and the leader doesn't get it, it just makes every day a grind, doesn't it? Yeah. They don't always have to be, understand what you're trying to do, but I think having some faith that actually investing in your people, doing things differently is a good thing, just goes a long way, doesn't it?
Well, and I would say it's a really interesting time, Lucy. I think profoundly artificial intelligence is going to change the role of HR in a profound way, in a very good way. In all the things that we talked about, we think about it as a co-pilot, not the pilot.
Yeah.
But we just did a research report that we do each year, and this year was around AI and the use of AI and the impact it has on companies. And 58% of people in a company, whether they're AI forward or not forward, are using ChatGPT to do performance reviews. And, that's a little risky because now you're using personal information, putting it in
That's really interesting and a little scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a little scary. So one of the things about our AI is private, and it's basically using HR language. And so it doesn't, we don't even train it. We use it to fine tune. But again, it's a much safer way to do this. And people need to embrace it. And I would encourage HR people to really embrace it, and the kinds of things we talked about. You use it as a bot, ask it questions, and it's very insightful in terms of what it can do. And we're going to continue to innovate in our product to make it something that totally differentiates. And again, gives relevant feedback that actually means something to somebody and can give difficult feedback in a very professional way that may be difficult for you to do on your own.
Doug, that's been really, really interesting. Where can people who are listening to this find you and find out more about Betterworks? What's the best route?
Please feel to reach out to me. My email is very easy. It's doug@betterworks.com.
There we go.
And I'll happily respond to anybody that sends me an email.
That's great. And we'll make sure we put that email into the show notes as well.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode, Doug. And it's been a real pleasure getting to know you a little bit over recent weeks. And thank you for making the time.
You as well, Lucy. Much appreciated.
Hi, and thanks for watching. If you found it useful, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications to get more videos like this.